Hey, this is Matt from thesecondspirit.com. I'm going to show you how to render out stems in Ableton. A few things to remember is it does stems post fader. So if you got any of these tracks, if their speakers are off, that means it's going to take that into consideration. The solos, all the effects and everything will be stemmed out. So make sure your speaker buttons are on if you want that track to stem out. Otherwise, it'll do an audio file without any audio. If you're stemming this out for remix, you might want to not have effects in it, which you would have to delete all your effects or turn them off. Or maybe you want to remove the automation. You right click on the track and say clear all envelopes. That'll remove the automation. If you want to stem it out and have it sound exactly the same as your project, you might come to a few problems. One, you might have some effects on the master bus, and you will have to basically save a project like this one and import your stems into it so you have that same master bus chain to run your stems through. That's one thing to remember. And the other thing is there's a few different ways to stem out, so I'll get more into that. But when you stem out, Ableton processing is at 32-bit. All the effects are processed at 32-bit. So what you're hearing when you're mixing is 32-bit. So you want to stem out at 32-bit. Otherwise your quality could go down a little bit and it's not exactly what you're hearing when you're mixing. So so the sample rate also will, if you change your sample rate, the idea is to have your sample rate on all these tracks the same when you're recording them in. And so if you're doing 48, have them all at 48, have your project set to 48. If you're doing 41, have them all at 41, have your project set at 41. Anytime it changes the sample rate, there can be some audio degradation, so watch out for that. So you really want all these to be at the same sample rate, and you want to stem out at 32-bit because that's what the processing is done at. To stem out, you select your area that you want to stem. So if you only want to stem from here, you would select there, and you could select your tracks that you want to stem out individually, or there's a lot of different ways. So I'm going to show you. You go to File, Export Audio Video, and here's your render tracks. So render, stem, print, bounce, it's pretty much the same kind of terminology there. So they all pretty much mean the same thing. Master tracks, I would just render out the master if you're doing a mix down. All individual tracks will render out all the tracks, all the aux tracks, the master, the group mix tracks, and the subgroups tracks. So that's the thing to remember, because if you're doing a project and you want it to sound exactly like this, you might want not to hear your subgroup mixes. So if you do all individual tracks, you'd have to mute those in your new project so you don't hear them. Selected tracks only is kind of like what we're doing here. You could select tracks, or you can select the tracks down here from a drop. If you just want to stem out one track, you can just select it there. In selected tracks only, if you're stemming out that way, like I said, you can't select from here, from your aux tracks in there, so you'd have to do two different render sessions. You can't select from the master in aux and from your main track area, but you can select all the tracks in the main track area. But with group tracks in this selected tracks only option, it kind of works a little differently too. Like you wouldn't see, you could select the two tracks in here, but once you close this, it's just going to render out the mix. And you have to close that track to select other tracks. So if you do that, it's not going to render out those two submix tracks, subgroup tracks in here. It's going to render out this mix and these two. So that's one thing to remember. If you wanted to render out those subgroup tracks, you could, but you wouldn't be able to select any tracks outside of that group. You would have to just do that, select these two, and then render out. Go into the selected tracks only menu. So anyway, yeah, you select your time, and then you select your time, and then you can render out. I'm going to, let's say, do all individual tracks, so it renders out everything. This is the render length. Remember, it's not the render endpoint, so it's not going to end at the same number. This is going to be the length of the render. Render as loop means that it would actually inject the end of, if you have trailing delays or anything at the end of your track, it will put it into the beginning so it sounds good as a loop and seamless. I don't want that because I'm trying to render out a song. Here's a file type. Sample rate, remember you want to keep that all the same. You know, that's the idea, is to have it all at the same sample rate, all of your tracks, all of what it's playing at. Bit depth, go ahead and render at 32, because that's what the effects and everything in Ableton is actually processing at. Dither is if you're downgrading your bit depth, which you don't really want to do because it actually does degrade the audio, and that's something that probably only should be done to an audio file once, and it should be done by the mastering engineer and not you. So I would just say always render up to 32 if you're any lower. And analysis file will be the waveform kind of appearance file. You know, I'll show you how the audio looks in the track. Go ahead and batch those out, because otherwise you'll have to render those later when you import them into a new project. If you're not, if you're rendering these out for somebody that's not using Ableton, then I guess you wouldn't need that, because they won't use that analysis file. Normalize would push the peak of each audio track to 0 decibels, so that would change the volume, and I'm trying to render these out so they sound the same as a mix as this mix when I import them. So I don't want to change the volume on anything. This would change the volume of the tracks and kind of push it up so it's at its peak, which does cause a little degradation to the audio too. Any change in volume does. So I don't need to do that. Convert to mono, self-explanatory. A couple things to notice as when you're naming tracks, if you're doing multiple tracks, like either the selected tracks only or the all individual tracks, and you have a title in here, it'll render out this title and then the track name title on each track. If you take the title out and render like that, it's just going to render the track name itself. And then if you're rendering a single track though, and you take the name out, it's going to render the track name. But if you title it, if you put a title in here and you're only rendering one track, it's actually going to override the track name and put that title in for it instead. And I have numbered these because of those subgroup tracks. I don't want to have those playing in my new project. So I've kind of come up with a way to number these so that the subgroups are 3-0, 3-1, 3-2. So the -1, -2, anything after 0 is a subgroup track, and I'll know that when I import it into my new project to mute those tracks, because I don't want them to play because I have the mix on the group track. And so also I have these A, B, C, D for the aux tracks. That way I know they're aux send tracks, and I'll be able to mute them. Master will always render out as a master track and be named master, so I'll know to mute that too. Anyway, that's it. This is Matt from The Second Spirit. You go to thesecondspirit.com and check out the website. I've got music stuff, Ableton posts, blog posts, studio posts. Sometimes I'm giving away free stuff, so go check it out. Hey, thanks for watching.